Okay.
Yeah.
For assistance. I hope the other officers can hear me.
If anyone at home, can you quickly type if you can hear?
I love that.
Okay, Bryce, can you hear us, Bryce? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we are now a national firm, soon to be an international firms in North America. A lot of interesting things going on in my orbit. My name is Steve Whitehorn. The name of my firm is Whitehorn Financial. We specialize in professional liability insurance and risk and practice management solutions for design firms. So today, we have at least a dozen different programs that we provide, but today I'm going to be talking about the construction phase.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We can hear you, but if you could get a little closer to the mic, you're breaking up just a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I think this is the mic. That is no problem. I love feedback. It's fantastic. So, so my name is Steve Whitehorn. We work with about 150, 160 different firms. Generally speaking, our space is New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. Our typical client is anywhere from about 15 employees to about 150 employees. We only deal with the traditional disciplines, such as architecture, landscape architecture, MEP, civil, structural. We really don't deal with any other miscellaneous, I'm going to say, disciplines. And our clients actually do work not just New York and the Philadelphia area, but literally all over the world. We work with some very interesting firms, Boland Sawinski here in Timberlake, Barrow Lewis Thrower. They recently were bought out by Perkins Eastman. And I'm not going to say I know everything. I don't know everything. There's always something new. And usually there's something new because of lawyers, right? It's about lawyers, unfortunately, because they always come up with these very interesting theories as to why one of our clients should be responsible for something that was created by someone else, right? So today I'm going to go through the 5 responsibilities during the construction phase, but I will say this, it's really important. Dealing with a firm that's 3 people, dealing with a firm that's 3,000 people. Everything in a firm needs to be a process, from design, schematics, design development, construction documents. Each of those phases is a process in terms of how you put together your document. The bidding phase is a process. And the reason why a process is so important is for twofold. Number one, the outcome is going to be significantly more predictable if it's a process as opposed to having to reinvent the wheel every single project. The second thing it does is it lowers your risk because the outcome is predictable. And also at the end of the day, it's going to improve your firm's profitability. Who here likes getting a raise? Who here likes going on vacation, right? So these things are really important. So if we're talking about the design phase, we're talking about the bidding phase, the construction phase, we're talking about billing, we're talking about reviewing contracts, responding to RFPs, everything is a process. And the more refined your process is, the more predictable the outcome is. Okay? So I'm going to go through the 5 phases of the construction phase. Now, who here is a project manager? Anyone? Okay, yeah, a bunch of project managers, fantastic. So hopefully, before you even begin working on a project, you were reading your agreement. What does your agreement say in terms of your responsibility during each phase? What does your responsibility say with respect to your responsibility during the construction phase? Okay, because what can happen is if it's a traditional AIA agreement or ASLA agreement, whatever you're using, and it's unamended, the process is very specific and it's repeatable. It's been design and construction has been done the same way for 100 years. Nothing has changed. Very, very little has changed. But if you have an unamended agreement, you're going to see what those 5 responsibilities are. If you have an agreement that's generated by an owner, or you have an agreement, if you're working for a developer, typically they'll want you to sign their agreement. If you're working for the city of New York or the city of New Orleans, whatever municipality, they may have their own agreement. You have to read the agreement to see what your responsibility is. One of our clients is one of your peers, Matthews Nielsen, down the street. And I remember years ago, they had an agreement with one of the city agencies here in the city. And during the construction phase, as I mentioned, there are the 5 responsibilities, but there was an additional responsibility in the agreement. And the responsibility was that the design firm, Landscape, Matthews Nielsen, they had to review the shop drawings with respect to the contractor's compliance with ADA. I've never seen that. The last 30 years, 15 years ago, I saw it, they were not able to negotiate out of it. But because that was in their agreement, they agreed to that responsibility. And so if the contractor was not conforming with ADA, they could be held liable for whatever the contractor did if they were not complying. So you have to be aware of what your agreement says. Each agreement could be a little different. Obviously, the scope by project is going to be different as well. All right. But it's important you look at the agreement. The other thing that would be great, which almost never happens, is that number one, you want to look at the agreement before you start the project. Secondly, in my opinion, it always makes sense to have a conversation with your client before construction happens. I say there are only 3 things in life you can guarantee: death, taxes, and change in a construction project. It's important that your client has a sense of anticipation because things are going to go wrong. If your project is a $50 million project, it's probably going to end up around 55 million or 52 million, hopefully not 65 million, right? But it's important that, in my opinion, you go over the agreement in terms of the construction phase and say to your clients, look, this is our responsibility during construction. We are not there every single day. We might be there 1 day a week. We might go to the site once every 10 days. We might go to the site at the appropriate stage of construction, right? Whatever that might be, however that's defined. So if you actually had a conversation with your client and say, look, we're not going to be here every single day, things are going to happen that we're not going to see, and we're not going to be able to protect you as if you believe we should be protecting you. Because at the end of the project, what happens to the owner's budget?
No.
Runs out. There's never any money left, right? And so you end up with anxiety, and it becomes stressful, and the owner is starting to get tense because it's not their money. They're a fiduciary to whoever they have to report to. So if you said to your client, look, we're not going to do it every single day, it's very possible they may say, well, you want something? I want you there more often. And I'm going to give you an example. I've only seen this once in my career. One of our clients in South Jersey, architectural firm, was hired by a town to design and then get built by a contractor, obviously, a like security, you know, where they have like the police department and the fire department. I forget what those are called. I mean, there's a special name they use it for. Oh, a name for it. Anyway, so the owner, and it was a municipality, which is very unusual, they wanted my client to be there every single day on the project when it was being built. Every single day, and they're willing to pay. The original budget for the project was $12.5 million. How much do you think there were in change orders? Throw me a number.
14.
14,000? Or you thought it would start out at 12.5 million, went to 14 million? What do you think? Throw me down the number. You're not going to believe this.
2 million.
Way high. How about this? There was a $12.5 million project. It was publicly bid, low bid. There were $40,000 of change orders, 20,000 of which were owner directed and 20,000 were coordination issues. Could you imagine that? Now, if your clients knew that you could actually provide that level of service and come within budget, within schedule, and with the appropriate quality, your clients would love you. But unfortunately, you're not there every day. And most owners don't have the vision to recognize the fact that you're being paid to protect them. All right. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start out by going through the responsibilities. Okay. So Jack Dempsey, one of the best heavyweight fighters of all time. He used to say, someone asked him, how come you're so good? And he said, the key to a good offense is a great defense. Now I turn this around. When it comes to protecting an owner on a construction project, the key to a good offense is a great defense. It's actually the opposite. The key to a good defense is a great offense. In other words, you need to be proactive. You have to be proactive because contractors, the subcontractors, they are going to want to try to find the lowest common denominator. So it's important that you're proactive in terms of what you're doing. It's important that you're consistent in terms of the notes that you're taking on site, which we'll get to a bit later as well. So the key to great defense is a good offense. So this is what we're going to talk about. Bam. Roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders on a project. We're going to talk about benchmarking and claims and things like that in terms of what kind of litigation lawsuits has the industry experienced. So we're going to talk about your 5 responsibilities. Observation evaluation. We're going to talk about submittals and substitutions. We're going to talk about payment certification. We're talking about change, which happens all the time. And finally, substantial completion. If you're the prime, then you're the one most probably that will actually determine when the project is substantially complete. We're going to talk about site safety issues, and we're going to talk about confidence, because nothing happens without confidence. So let's start with the benchmarking information. Oh, we're going to start with the design teams. Okay, so probably 99% of your projects are delivered this way. This is known as design bid build or traditional project delivery. The owner has the site. The owner's most important responsibility, what do you think? Most important responsibility to you guys?
Pay us.
Absolutely. Most important is to pay. Okay, and the second most important responsibility, what do you think? Make a quick decision, right? Here are the options. Which way you want to go? You want to go A or B, right? We need quick decisions, right? The owner hires you. You guys start designing. You have all your subconsultants below you, right? And then ultimately, when the documents are ready or suitable for construction, you're going to give the documents actually to the owner. And the owner goes out to a number of contractors, CMs, whoever it might be, and they're going to say, we can build this. We know how to build this. We can do it for X amount of money and it'll take a certain period of time. Then they start to build. And when they build, you see there's a dotted line there. The dotted line means that you are basically acting as an agent to the owner and reporting to the owner what the contractor is doing. You don't have a contractual responsibility or relationship with the contractor. You can't tell the contractor what to do. Your role during construction is to report to the owner as the eyes and ears. This is what they're doing. This is what they're not doing. And if something's not right, which we'll get to a bit later, the owner can say, well, I don't care. That's fine. You can't say, no, it's not right to do it. Your responsibility is to report to the owner, advise them, and it's the owner that has the responsibility and the relationship with the contractor to tell them what to do. Okay? Any questions so far? It's okay to ask a question. Bueller? No questions? No questions. Okay. So when we talk about construction, you have to think about this. You're administering the contract for construction. That means you're administering the relationship. You're helping the owner navigate the relationship between the owner and the contractor. That's what you're doing. Okay? You're not administering construction. You're not in charge of construction. That's not your responsibility. That's solely the responsibility of the contractor. You're administering the relationship. So when I say you're administering the relationship, so what types of things or documents do you think would be important in order to appropriately administer the relationship between the two? And these are known as the contract documents. And we give me one.
Drawing.
That's perfect. Specifications, drawings. What else is it? Addendums. Change. Right? Those are the 5 things. So you are administering the relationship or administering the contract for construction. You're not administering construction. That's not your responsibility, and that's something you don't want to get involved with. And I'll tell you why. Because something's going to happen, and contractor or sub's going to come up to you and say, how would you do this? How would you install this? And if you give them an answer for something like that, and then there's a failure, someone trips and falls a year later, you're going to have responsibility for giving that advice. I'll give you a great example. We're talking about 15 years ago. One of our clients is a very well-respected traffic engineer here in the city. Okay, and what do traffic engineers typically do? What do you think? What do they do? What do traffic engineers do?
Design roads.
They say it again.
Traffic.
They do. They also count cars. That's a really big thing. They count cars. Okay. So one of my clients here in the city, this goes back 15 years ago, he was on a corner counting cars. 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, you know, this kind of thing, right? He's counting cars. And a contractor, half a block up on the street, one of the avenues, was putting up cones, and he was going from a 4-lane roadway to one lane. And so the engineer walked up to the contractor and said, you know, maybe you should put your signage like this, and maybe you should arrange the cones a little like that. All right? Walks away. Half hour later, an 18-wheeler is going from 4 lanes to 1 lane, and there was someone on a bicycle, and he was ran over by this 18-wheeler. The guy will never be the same. I mean, he was hurt. It was horrible. City of New York ended up paying about $20 million for that because it's their land. The contractor, whatever insurance limits they had, they paid all their limits out, I'm sure. And the engineering firm, they had $2 million of insurance, paid it all out because they gave the advice. So if we go back to this, someone comes up to you on a job site and say, what do you think of this? Your knee-jerk reaction ideally will be, you know what, I don't know. Let me go back to the office, speak to someone, and then I'll give you the answer tomorrow morning. So you come back to the office. So you speak to whomever it might be, and you may decide, you want something? I know how to do it. I'm going to give the answer. And that's okay, but you have to play nice in the sandbox. But the answer might be, I don't know. I'm not being paid to do that. That's your responsibility. Okay? People come up to you on job sites all the time. All right? So just be careful. As like a knee-jerk reaction, once again, I don't know. Let me go back to the office. Let me speak to someone. Then you figure out what that response is going to be. Ideally, in construction, it would be great if literally all the stakeholders are like these yin and yang. Everyone gets along. Doesn't happen like that. Doesn't happen like that. So you just have to choose your spots or choose it carefully. Yes.
So what the, in a situation when someone approaches you, and it's just a simple matter of pointing them to the spec or to the construction detail.
That's fine. No issue. The spec is the spec, right? And they're your documents. But I'll say something when we get down to the submittal, you know, what will happen and what does happen, I'm sure all the time, is that contractors want to use you as a drive-up window, even though the information is the spec, right? So I'm going to teach you, I'm going to give you some strategies how to deal with it. We have some very specific forms that will help you navigate that situation. But yeah, if it's in the spec, it's in the spec, and that's no big deal. But it's like, well, how do I, you know, how would you attach this lamp to a pole or that kind of thing? That's really more what I'm talking about.
Or
Any other questions?
interpretation.
Good questions, back. Exactly. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so, oh, right, so contractor responsibility, they're responsible for the means, method, techniques, and procedures. In other words, they say, we know how to do it, okay? And the contractor has a contract with the owner, and in their contract is going to use this language. We have the means, methods, techniques, sequences, and safety procedures of how to actually build it. That basically means the contractor knows what they're doing. When was the last time we met a perfect contractor? Thank you. Right? So, but that's actually what they say. And they are actually giving a guarantee and a warranty that they can actually build the project. They're responsible for the construction site. They're going to provide you a schedule of values. Can anyone tell me why the contractor will always give us a schedule of values? We'll never give you a submittal schedule, but always give you the schedule of values. Anyone tell me? Exactly. because they want to get paid. They're supposed to create the submittal schedule, which they don't, with different techniques that we can use. And they're also responsible for site safety. Anyone tell me why? What do you think?
They're the ones that have to carry insurance for theirs.
Yes, but they also control the workforce, right? And so since they control the workforce, they're the ones who are responsible for site safety. Your contracts will always say you are not responsible for site safety. That's solely the responsibility of the contract. Okay, that's what your language says. But we'll talk about site safety as we get to the end. Okay? All right. So this is where claims come from. All right. 3/4 of the claims that come up historically in the industry are design errors or alleged errors or omissions. All right. You have 5% of claims that come from like studies and reports where it might be inaccurate, or they're using a study report for something it wasn't actually designed for or studied for, but they're using it for something that's irrelevant. Only 13% of claims come from the construction phase. That's it. Only 13%. Okay. However, those claims can be very, very significant. All right. Oh, let me go back here. So, and this is a little outdated, but nonetheless, the average claim going back 10 years ago for a payment that was made by an insurance company during the construction phase was $130,000. That was the average. Okay. The top 25%, $200,000. Top 10%, $400,000. Right. We had a client here, very successful. I'm going to call them a CM, really an engineering firm. Ultimately, the owners of that firm were indicted because they were doing some very nefarious things. But we had a project, or they had a project on West Side Highway, and a bridge literally fell out of the sky onto a couple of cars. So there were the CMs on it. Obviously, there were a bunch of subcontractors on it, so and so on. It was horrible. In that situation, I think the carrier paid out as a CM around $450,000. Now we're talking 15 years ago at this point. The numbers are probably 50% more in today's world. All right. And I'll give you another example. Of all claims across all kinds of claims in the construction industry on the design side, the average claim 3 years ago that a carrier paid out was $250,000. 3 years ago. Now we have inflation. The average claim right now is $470,000. It's crazy. It's nuts. But it takes a lot of money to either fix something or to address an issue if someone gets hurt. So the numbers are much more staggering than these, and these are pretty big numbers, to say the least.
Is there nationwide?
Nationwide, yes, in the United States. And incidentally, my understanding, although I can't confirm it because that's not my world. My understanding is that the cost of insurance, this kind of insurance that we handle, professional liability insurance, is very similarly priced in Canada because they have very similar legal system as well. Now, if you guys were in England and you guys pay out a lot of money, it would be about 25% of the cost that you guys pay here in the States. The best thing about America, the United States, you can sue anyone. The worst thing about the United States, they can sue you too. And that's why the insurance is as expensive as it is. So the 13% of claims that come up during construction typically arise out of 3 different issues. Number 1, bodily injury, someone getting hurt, right? Secondly, delays and extras, right? A project keeps going and going and going and going. And the contractors themselves, they keep pointing the finger. Yeah, we're not doing the submittals quickly enough, blah, blah, blah. You're holding things up. The documents weren't clear. We're going to come up with all kinds of reasons why you're at fault as opposed to them being at fault, right? But 40% come from claims, the delays and extras, okay? And mostly delays and extras are for public projects, low bid, right? Because what happens in a low bid situation, the contractor with the lowest bid gets the work for the project, but they know that they're going to lose money on the project. So what they're going to do is they're going to start played the system in order to get back to parity and make as much money as possible. Okay? It's kind of like the big dig, right? The big dig started at $1 billion, $1.5 billion. Ended up costing like $6.5 billion, something crazy. Low bid, was delayed an extra 5 years, and so forth and so on. And the third big category is property damage. And I'll give you an example of this, okay? So we have a structural engineer. We have quite a few structural engineers, but it doesn't matter. So we're in a city like New York City, Philadelphia, 3 buildings next to each other. You take the middle building out, and what happens? The building on the right starts to sag, or the building on the left sinks. We had a situation where the building in the center was taken out, the building sank 8 inches. And then the contractor, the CM, they got hydraulic jacks to jack it up, and then it sunk another 12 inches. That's not good. That's not a good thing to happen, right? But unfortunately, those are the kinds of things that happen, especially if you're in an urban environment. Most of our clients don't involve with what's known as supportive excavation services. That's like a structural engineer who designs a temporary structure so the contractor can build, right? When firms are involved with that kind of thing, they get sued all the time because the building's going to crack. You know, the property next door is going to say there was damage to it and all kinds of horrible things, which is unfortunate. But at times, you know, if you really want a project to move forward, they call that progress. That's the cost of progress at times, unfortunately. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. So, all right, and this talks about, you know, where all the claims coming from during construction. Most of the claims are coming from public work in terms of frequency, the number of claims, and also the severity of claims. Okay. So we're going to talk about the 5 responsibilities. The first responsibility is you're going to observe and evaluate. You go out to the site. You're going to take notes. Your notes are going to be very consistent. Your notes are not just going to be consistent, but they're going to be extremely politically correct. Okay, let's assume a contractor does something. They did a terrible job. You're not going to say this guy has absolutely no idea what he's doing. He's a Yahoo. You're not going to say that. You're going to say the work does not meet the requirements of the contract documents. And then you're going to point out, okay, because of this, whatever it might be. You want to be politically correct. You want to be very consistent about your visits, what you're looking at, what you're doing, and so forth and so on. You are not inspecting, okay? If you were doing public projects, right, roads and highways, and a contractor's building, and you were like a construction manager, construction inspector, you would actually be there every single day. You're only observing and evaluating. That's all you're doing. You're not inspecting, because it has to do with the level of intensity. Okay? You're observing, yes.
Who typically inspect on your budget?
On public projects, you have engineering inspectors. Because basically what the engineering inspectors, it's like a firm. It'll be a firm. It could be a firm of 1 person, or like this other firm I was talking about, when the bridge fell out of the sky, they had 650 employees at one point. And they'll have crews there all day long, every single day, every single day, every single day. Because they're supposed to be protecting the public's interest from the contract, supposedly. But unfortunately, public projects typically cost way more money than privately funded projects. So the system doesn't really work. Yeah,
That inspector reports.
that's right. And that inspector, correct. That inspector is hired by the public entity and reports to the public entity.
Would that be the role of a resident engineer?
A resident engineer, that's exactly right. And it would be like 1 resident engineer and then they have a couple other people on staff. Because typically, you know, the construction is not just isolated, it's like 1 little area. It could be, you know, if it's like a 1-mile stretch of a highway, they could have like 4 to 6 people making sure what they're doing is they're counting quantities. You know, if there's supposed to be concrete, they want to make sure the aggregate is correct, that, you know, the contractor's not skipping on the amount of material that they're using, the quality of material, and that kind of thing, right? Now, typically in New York, those types of firms, like the resident engineers, they are quote unquote not responsible for site safety, but there's really bad language in their contracts that actually state you are responsible for site safety, even though they're acting as if they're not. So that it's kind of a double-edged sword there. And with a lot of municipal works, city work, whatever, a lot of those agreements are not negotiable. So it's kind of like either take the work or don't take the work. But here's the agreement. It is what it is, which is a shame, but that's what it comes down to. So you're observing, evaluating, you're making sure that the work is in general compliance with the contract documents. That's what you're doing. Okay? And once again, you're not supervising, you're not directing, you're not performing inspections. Okay, now, so let's assume you're on a project site, contractor, one of their subs, not doing a good job. You have the ability and responsibility to reject the work if it doesn't meet the general compliance with the contract documents. The owner, however, can accept the work if they want. But if they accept work that's inferior, it's important that you write them a note, an email, whatever it might be, saying, our opinion is that you should be rejected because it doesn't meet so forth and so on. However, if you want to approve it, that's perfectly fine. That's your own responsibility. All right. Now, the only thing that you can't reject, well, you can reject, but you can't allow to go by, is that if it violates HSW, health, safety, and welfare, the owner has to, whatever's being built always must conform to that standard, whatever that standard is for HSW. Okay. And I remember, for example, one of your peer firms here in the city, one of our clients, was the lead landscape firm for Governor's Island, phase 1 and 2. Okay. And I remember at some point in time, that was a very large project. We're going back at least 10 years. It was about 120 million, 130 million construction died, right? So the lead architect died. So, you know, they designed it and they had a couple of other landscape firms. I know Matthews Nielsen was on that project as well for a long time. But anyway, so there was a fountain, okay, in one area. And it was for kids, right? And so the fountain was supposed to cost $1 million to build, right? Nice fountain for $1 million, right? So anyway, the owner, quote unquote, or the client for Governor's Island were like 3 different agencies. All right. And a decision was made that they didn't want to hire this firm for the construction phase of the building of this fountain. Okay. So my client wrote a note and said, you know, you would like us to take this out of our scope. No problem. So the fountain is finally built. The fountain is supposed to cost $1 million. How much do you think it ultimately cost? Throw me a number. 2.5. Exactly. Can you imagine that? And it's the same fountain. And then the owner called up my client. There was a change of administration within the owner of Governor's Island, the trustees, whatever it might be. Called my client and said, you know, you designed this fountain. It's supposed to cost $1 million. It's going to cost you $2.5 million. And I said, well, look, I wrote you a letter. The letter stated, or the email, the message was, if I'm not there, I can't protect you. It was a 2-minute conversation. It was documented. So they moved on, you know, it's like politics. They just kick the can down the road. Extra $1.5 million, right? Whatever it might be. But the reality is, if the owner's going to accept inferior work, you can reject it and make sure you document whatever that decision is. If it violates HSW, the owner cannot accept it. They have to move on.
Does that include ADA?
Yes,
HSW? So if
Yes,
you
it does.
ADA,
absolutely. It includes ADA, yes. Yeah. So like, for example, you know, stairs are like, you design it one way, it meets code in terms of the height, right, of each stair, and they build it beyond that, can't accept it. Because someone is going to get hurt. We've had all kinds of crazy situations where it was designed properly, but it just happened to be a hazard. Because, like, for example, I'm thinking this very Comcast Center in Philadelphia has like a dark marble plaza and a staircase that goes down about 4 or 5 stairs is kind of like designed into this huge slab of marble so it doesn't stick out. It's in. And so when it rains and it's really dark, people will walk over the edge not realizing that it was it stopped and then there was a drop. So 3 people got hurt, and unfortunately, our client was responsible, even though it was designed to code the hazard. So, yeah.
So in the situation that you just mentioned,
Yes.
with the letter and kind of clarifying the scope of work and responsibilities, is that something that the firm would draft and your office would review or advise? Or-
Yeah, well, we would definitely advise if you would like, but if it's kind of like something like in general, like kind of like not something that's really detailed or whatever it might be. Usually it's just typically our clients would send it out, but if it's something that's really important, then we would get advised. We would probably notify the carrier, and actually the carriers, they promote like early intervention. So there's actually coverage where if we need to, or the carrier needs to, or you need legal advice on something, they'll pay for that. Because being proactive actually ultimately saves them a lot of money. And on my firm, for example, we literally have one of the best claims guy in the country that works with us. He was with a carrier for 25 years and he decided to retire. So he's been with us for the last 2 years. Literally the best. This guy's seen everything. And we also have an attorney on retainer to our office as well. So like every once in a while, like some kind of legal quirky thing might come up. And so if that's the case, then we would go to Max, who's kind of like a left-hand person on the legal end that has been involved, a defense attorney in the construction industry for like 40 years. So I've been doing this 30 years. I think he's about 10 years older than I am. Yes.
Quick question, just to rewind on the evaluation versus inspection
Yes.
rule. Could you clarify what level of questioning is appropriate when you're on site? You have to report, let's say you see something, the thickness of that, let's say that bed of concrete isn't proper. What's your take on?
Okay,
that?
my take on that would be if it's really a minor thing, then say, look, it doesn't look right, and so on. So I wouldn't tell them how to fix it, right? If it's really an issue, then that's the kind of thing where, whoa, red flag, come back here, speak to Kate, we'll tee up whatever kind of team we need in order to address that issue. But if it's really something that's imminent, the owner needs to know about it.
I'm wondering in terms of speaking with the contractor, asking the contractor, like, what happened here? Is there something I'm missing?
That's okay.
Right.
But yeah, it doesn't look right, and that's okay. And they're going to say, and depending what that answer is, but you're not there to provide direction. That's really what it comes down to. Any other questions? Okay, so rejecting work. Yes, you can reject work. And I remember years ago when we restored our home, we decided that instead of removing all of the lead-based paint from the molding, we just literally got rid of all the molding, had it refabricated to the original. It's a 100-year-old Center Hall Colonial. And the contractor ripped the wood through the lathe too quickly. And when they started painting, there were like all these ridges. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? And so at the end of the day, we negotiated whatever it was, and I accepted it, even though it wasn't really what it should have been, right? So, but in a situation like that, getting rid of lead-based paint and freshly coated paint, even though there were little ridges and no one really could see it except for me and my ego, so to speak. It was okay. We left it alone. Okay, second responsibility, you're going to review submittals. You're going to actually tell the contractor what submittals you want to see, right? Shop drawings could be samples, whatever it might be. Now, you should not be reviewing submittals that you didn't request. You're not being paid to review those, right? So ideally, if a submittal is forwarded to you, it's not required, I would just reject it and say it's not required. Contractor may say, wait, I want you to look at it, so and so on. But the reality is you're not being paid to look at it, and you only want to see the things that you personally requested or your firm requested in and of itself. All right. So the contractor is supposed to provide the submittal schedule. And what that does is it really tells the owner that the contractor has really planned out the cadence of construction. They really understand how they're going to build the project from start to finish. Most of the time, you'll never get the submittal schedule. So you do one of two things. At kickoff, when you say, we're not going to review a submittal until we get the submittal schedule. And you'll just sit in your hands. And then the contractors start whispering in the ear, you're holding the project up, holding the project up, holding the project up, right? The other thing you could do is you could say to the contractor, well, we'll review them, but we will not approve the certification for payment until we get a single schedule. All right. So those are your two options for the moment. A third option, and I've seen this happen, very few of our clients actually do this. The owner requires the design team to pull all the submittals out and put together a preliminary submittal schedule. And then that goes to the contractor, they put dates on it, fine tune it, and it goes back to you and it's approved. But that requires additional work, okay, on your part, on your firm's part. I've seen that a couple of times in a school up Goshen area, New York, where it's actually required by contract with the design firm or design team, architect usually will pull all the submittals out. And that way they always get the single schedule. And at the end of the day, it saves the design team a lot of money when they get the schedule. That way, like if you want to go on vacation next week and today's Thursday and you want to leave tomorrow, right? And you're gone next week and then all of a sudden the contractor dumps like a dozen submittals on your desk, but you're away. So then you have to pull someone off another project so they can actually take over and figure out, gee, what was the real design intent when it was designed such and such way and so on and so on. You know what I mean? So it helps internally manage your resources in terms of who's going to be able to do what and so on and so on. Okay. Any questions so far? All
I
right.
have a question.
By all means.
When would the contractor typically submit the submittal schedule? I
Okay.
assume it's early.
Yeah, ideally, it would be great if the contractor submitted the submittal schedule a week before construction starts. Because that's the ideal, or even at the kickoff meeting, that would be perfectly fine as well. But it's kind of like once the train leaves the station, my clients say 80% of the time they are never getting the submittal schedule, ever. And they're going to keep asking, and the CM is supposed to get involved, or the owner's rep is supposed to be involved. 80% of the time, they never get the schedule. Now, I'll say this. In the last 3 years, I wrote 2 books, okay? One book is about how to create greater impact of your projects, your relationships in your communities, like making everything into a process in your firm, from schematics, as I was saying, DDs, CVs, billing, whatever it might be, okay? So that's in our core business. It talks about like crazy claims I've seen over the years. The other book that I wrote, we just launched the startup a week ago, and it's called Risk-Free Construction Solution. Basically, it's a technology solution to create greater predictability regarding projects, budget, schedule, and quality of construction. Now, in that program, we require the contractor to provide the submittal schedule. And there's no way they're going to get around that. Because as the owner's rep, virtual CM, contractually, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. So every project that you work on where risk-free construction is involved, you will always get the submittal schedule. Always. That never happens for the last 30 years, 50 years. Just, you never get the submittal schedule. Yeah.
I mean, it gets through about anything, right? So how is it that this isn't something that's accountable to the point where the contractor's not providing it? They're not getting sued for not meeting.
Right. And so what happens is when we talk about the submittals, they start playing games, right? They're supposed to provide the AIA language, okay, says the contractor will provide a submittal schedule, comma, if available, comma. So it's like they have an easy way out. And so what happens is when we talk about submittals, what they're going to start doing is they're going to provide all these submittals all at once. They're going to give you RFIs and RFIs and RFIs and RFIs all over the place, right? And so the only thing you can do is well, there are 2 things you can do. Number one, you're going to want to push back, right? At the owner in particular, say, look, if you want to review all this stuff all at one time, we have other projects. So if you want us to put your project in front of the line, then you have to pay us more money. That's one thing, okay? The other thing that's probably happening, especially with RFIs, this happens all the time, is that they're going to give you all kinds of RFIs, and what they're going to start saying, especially in litigation, is that, if the documents were really that good, why would we have had so many questions, right? So when we get to RFIs, and we'll talk about that, we have a form that we suggest you use, and we'll give you a strategy for using that as well. So anyway, the contract's supposed to provide the submittal schedule. All right, so I'm gonna go just a little further here. Okay, so they're gonna provide you submittals, shop drawings and samples, okay? Right, now shop drawings is actually not considered, it is not a contract document. Shop drawings and submittals are communication. It's about communication between the contractor and you as design team. In other words, you want to make sure the contractor really understands the design intent in terms of your design. There should be no substitutions in a shop drawing. Happens all the time. You're not supposed to be looking at dimensions, right? And so technically, your responsibility in terms of observation and dealing with submittals is somewhat limited. All right. And what will happen is a contractor will say, yeah, but we changed this here and you approve the shop drawing. And so we put a different pump in, and pumps never work. Okay. Mechanical pump, right, for building. But you approved it. And then, yeah, but you see, we're only looking at the submittals with respect to the design intent found in the contract documents. Contract documents is not a submittal. Contract documents are the specifications, the drawings, addendums, change orders, that kind of thing.
Then what do you do in that situation? You write that?
It actually, this is what happens, okay? Yeah, that happens. And pumps, mechanical pumps in particular, this happens all the time, right? A mechanical engineer specs a pump and, you know, in the shop drawing, they show a different pump and it's approved or
Right.
reviewed. So the contractor starts quoting the thing, yeah, but you approved it. And you point the finger and say, yeah, but we're only looking at the design intent. We're not looking at the actual specification, you know, the performance specification, this kind of thing, right? And so ultimately, a couple of things are going to happen. The owner's going to say, okay, I'll pay a third, design pay a third, contractor pays a third. Or the owner's going to say, I don't want to have anything to do with it, you guys figure it out. And it'll go back and forth and back and forth. And ultimately, the majority of that's going to fall on the shoulders of the contractor, but probably a design member, team member will probably pay a plaintiff affordably. But it goes back and it gets pushed around. Because, oh, by the way, and most of the time, not a lot of claims actually come out of submittals. Very few claims actually come out of submittals. You know, the catwalk, Kansas City catwalk, you know, where it collapsed like 35 years ago, killing 10 people. But that was a change in the submittals. There's a calculation change in the submittals, and it was an error actually. Okay, yeah, so shop drawings,
What are RFIs and all,
those are all considered submittals here.
and then they are not contract.
They are not contract documents. They're basically communication documents. Okay? Because with an RFI, they're request for information.
Well, with the caveat that if you issue some sketches or you provide a response in the submittal that later gets into the addendum, then that becomes a contract document.
Yeah, and ultimately that will become a contract document. But usually it's kind of like 90% of the time, especially if you're getting RFI to death, I'll go to you in 2 seconds. It's kind of like, well, where do I find this information? It's already in the documents and specifications. A lot of, especially if you're getting tons and tons of RFI, a lot of that stuff actually is about, well, gee, I'm going to use you as a drive-up window, as opposed to truly a legitimate question. Okay? And there's a reason why they have that in the process, because there are going to be legitimate questions. Yes.
It says that frowned upon to reference, and let's see, issue for bid to reference previous addendums in your notes then, because that's a document binding, but like, to be referencing addendums then?
Well, here's the thing. In other words, you're preparing the documents for bid. Yeah, it's okay to reference the addendum. Yeah, because that's part of the design itself. Unless, you know, before it goes out to bid, you're going to incorporate whatever those addendums are into the actual drawings themselves.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, because the contractor with a CM or GC, they're going to be bidding on drawings, and specifications, and addendums. Those are basically the 3 things they're going to be bidding. Any other questions? So one of the strategies, and I guess I'm gonna kind of skip forward here. So design professional, compare the information, the drawings, the information, design concept found, the contract documents, that's what we're doing. Right? You're not supposed to be recalculating whatever it might be. We find structural engineers actually do that, where they will actually look at different calculations from other people. And then you're gonna put a stamp on it. And your stamp is gonna be very straightforward, ideally, and this is typically what you'd say. Yours might be slightly different.
We've taken the word approved.
I'm sorry,
We've taken the word approved off.
that's fine. Approved, reviewed, whatever it might be, no issue.
No exceptions taken.
You don't want that one.
Oh,
Do you have no exceptions taken?
yeah.
Okay, that actually should come out completely. And I'll tell you why, okay? 30 years ago, the industry, the legal industry, the insurance industry, they said, use no exceptions taken. They were promoting this concept because it doesn't mean you're approving and reviewing it. Doesn't mean you're rejecting or not doing anything, right? But basically what the courts found was that if you check no exceptions taken, it's the same thing as you reviewed or approved it. So either review it, approve it, or reject it. You see what I'm saying?
So it should be reviewed instead of no exceptions taken.
Yeah, either reviewed, rejected,
Yeah.
or, resubmit with, corrections and stuff and so that kind of thing. Because you want to have a sense of conviction, right, or confidence about, okay, I reviewed it, it's good. If you leave that language there, and it's perfectly fine if you do, it's the same thing as you reviewed it.
Yeah.
That's all.
Is reviewed different than approved?
It's the same thing. The whole industry says, once it's approved, reviewed, same thing. You might also have another one here that says for information only,
That's what we have to be at.
and that's fine. Like, for example, let's assume the contractor is going to hire some kind of fabricator, or whatever. And you, even though you're not a structural engineer, but I'm just use that example because for me, that's an easy one, not that bright.
You are.
That's a joke. Okay, no, but anyway, but you just want to make sure that the fabricator had an engineer that designed it and signed the seal. That's all you want, just information, perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And there are going to be times when you're going to want that.
We use for record only because one of our projects with a prime,
Okay.
and we're contractually obligated to look at every single.
Fine, that's no problem. Yeah, and that's fine. It could be, for information only. You might have slightly different language in there, but just the same thing. You just want to make sure that someone actually did what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. Okay, RFIs I talked about, request for information, interpretation, whatever it might be. In here, okay, in this packet, we have a sample form of our RFI. Okay, and what it does is it requires the contractor to specifically tell you where they looked at the documents before they ask you the question. So that way, you're not going to get drive-up window every single day. And you're going to find that the number of RFIs are going to plummet by probably 80–85% if you have someone who's abusing the system. And if you also have someone abusing the system, you need to say something to the owner. The information is consistently in our documents. They're not reading it. They got to read it. Okay. The other thing you have in here, I guess one page after that, is a request for substitution. Now, some of my clients love this form. Okay. And they love it because it requires the contractor to lay out specifically what the original item was and the various parameters. And then side by side specifically, they have to give you all the information on the substitution. Instead of you having to spend half your day running around trying to find information. The only reason why they want a substitution is because they're going to make money. It's going to take them less time to do it. And they're never passing all that savings on to the owner. Right? This is how they make up, especially in a low bid situation, this is how they make up profit by taking advantage and gaming the system. I'm kind of going to go back to this in risk-free construction, the startup that we just launched. This is never going to happen because it's going to be required by contract that they're going to be using these forms. So the other thing you can do is, especially if you're prime on a project, what you do is you take those forms and you put them into the specifications. The contractor bids on the project, they get the project, they say we guarantee and warrant that we're going to do this, so forth and so on. That also means that they guarantee that they're going to use the forms that you provided, because they bid on that as well. So it's like you have to be proactive, right? The key to a good defense is a great offense. And that's how you do it, at least in the short term. And ultimately, incidentally, we will be designing a submittal submittal platform that will have all this stuff integrated into it. Okay, so to deal with change. That's 3. So number 1, observe and evaluate. Number 2, you deal with submittals. Number 3, you deal with change orders. Ideally, you're involved with every single change order because you're there to protect the owner. If you find out that there are change orders that are not involved in the process, you need to step up and say something to the owner. I need to be involved. Number 1, you're there to protect the owner and give them advice in terms of, gee, was this really in the base design? Was this really a change order? And that happens, okay? The second thing is, once again, whatever that change is, it might violate HSW. And so you need to give the owner advice in terms of, does that change actually violate ADA or HSW and so on and so on, okay? Any questions? All right, so number 4, okay, change orders, blah, 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 you should be invited, da, 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 da. Okay, there are gonna be times, especially when you're prime, you're gonna be involved with certification for payment, okay? That's your 4th responsibility. We really don't see a lot of issues for this historically that I can remember. The only claim I've ever seen in my entire life, in my career, 30 years, was a structural engineer that was not my client, thank God. And he certified some work that was being done. He's out of Philadelphia, the firm's out of Philadelphia. He certified work to the tune of $400,000 that was done, and it was not done. And then, of course, the contractor went bankrupt. So his insurance company basically reimbursed the owner the $400,000 that he should not have certified. Okay? And finally, your last responsibility. Oh, and by the way, you're always going to get the schedule of values because the contractor wants to get paid. All right. Oh, and here, let me just go back to that. That one I don't want to skip. Okay, so it's certifications. Okay, so 1 certification for payment, but you also may be involved in a project that's being financed, and the lending institution may turn to your firm and say, we want you to certify certain things about the project. One of them might be, we want to certify that if the owner goes bankrupt, we can step into the shoes of the owner to complete the project. That's one of them. But you always have to be really careful about the language if you're ever going to certify something other than for payment. Okay? Because if you certify something, all right, that's a guarantee. Okay, and design professionals are not held to a standard, or typically held to the standard of a guarantee or a warranty. That means perfection. Okay, because what's happening is you are showing a contractor what to build, and the contractor is saying, I know how to build. So you are not supposed to be perfect. Imagine that. If anyone's ever been married or had a serious boyfriend or girlfriend over the years, you start out perfect, right? You start out perfect, but after 30 years, you might not be so perfect, right? So anyway, so the language that you use in a certification, you're going to change it to an opinion, in my professional opinion, based on the information available. I hereby certify that, whatever it might be. The other thing about certifications is that you only want to certify those things that you're being paid for and are responsible for. So you can't say at the end of the project, I hereby certify there's going to be water hookup. You're not involved with hooking up the water. But you're involved with, okay, I hereby, in my professional opinion, I certify that the documents meet the interpretation of the ADA, right? You can certify that. In your opinion, it meets ADA, your design. You can't say the construction meets ADA because you have no idea what's going to happen and you are not there every single day. Anyway, at the end of the day, if anything like this comes up and someone asks you to certify something, just give us a call, and we can help you navigate. And when from bank, you can get a certification that's like 5 pages long. Don't even look at it. Oh, and the bank is going to say, or insurance company that's lending the money, they're going to say, but everyone signs it. No one signs it. They just say that to get you to sign it because they want the ability to rely upon any paperwork that you sign in the event something goes wrong. They don't care. They just want deep pockets. Who's going to be responsible? So anyway, if you ever get a certification request, just let us know. Okay. Right. So that's certification. And then ultimately, ultimately, if you're the prime, you're going to establish substantial completion. And what that means is basically the owner is getting a temporary occupancy for whatever the project is. And then ultimately, the contractors are supposed to provide a punch list when they finish it out and the project's over and everything is wonderful, we hope. But unfortunately, not all projects go perfectly, right? And the other thing is, and everyone here in this room knows this, if you've ever had a bad client, it's like nothing goes right. But I will say this, as an overview, these are the 5 responsibilities. Try to stay within the lane that you're in. If you don't know something and you feel uncomfortable, give us a call. We have a lot of experience. We have significant resources available to us. Yeah, and does anyone have any questions? So let me just go to the end here. Oh, job site safety. This actually, I do want to touch on this. This is important. Okay, so job site safety, and this is actually really important. I'm glad I just went through to the end here. Okay. All your contracts say you're not responsible for site safety. That's solely the responsibility of the contractor. Okay. Now, most states are like that. Pennsylvania is definitely like that. Delaware is definitely like that. New Jersey is not like that. New Jersey says if you recognize danger and do nothing, you have responsibility. That's different. New York, not so good. Because especially if workers get hurt, the labor laws are very weak, where they actually, contractors, employees of the contractors, they have been successful at getting money from our clients over the years.
From the design team.
Yes. Yeah, on a project. Because what happens is when a construction worker gets hurt. I'm just using a construction worker, but this is the same for every industry, okay? Someone gets hurt, they receive workman's compensation. And so because of that, the owner now has immunity from any lawsuit that the employee may bring against them. So what they do is they look to everyone else as to why it's everyone else's issue. Okay. So in that situation, the employer is gone and out of it. And so the employee will sue everyone else under the sun. If your name is on the document, name is on the documents, you're going to be named. Ultimately, you'll get off. We hope. Sometimes, depending upon what your role is on a project, you may potentially have some exposure. And I've actually seen that happen with a trench collapse. And the employee that was being deposed was not prepared properly. And so the firm ended up paying out $1.2 million. One guy was killed, one guy's a paraplegic.
Then a design firm?
Yeah, it was the same construction inspector, the registered resident engineer. They were on a project. Quirky thing happened. They're on a project. Three teams of contractors were supposed to show up, right? Actually, it was, yeah. We go back. Only 2 teams were supposed to show up on the construction side, right? But 3 showed up. And so this one inspector was walking between the 3 sites when he only should have been walking between the 2. There was a trench that was like 9.5 feet deep. He went over and said to the foreman, "You need to shore this trench." The former convinced them, "Oh, don't worry, we're almost done." He turns around, the trench collapses. Okay. And in that situation, my client, the engineer, had a bad contract. There was a reference to site safety. And ultimately what happened was there was a judgment against the engineering firm for $400,000. There was a judgment against the city of New York for $800,000. And then the city of New York sued the engineering firm, say that $800,000 is really yours because they had an agreement with the owner, the city of New York. We indemnify if we create damage to you, we have to make you whole. And then the crazy thing that goes on further, the court said, yes, the engineering firm has to pay the $800,000 and then the insurance company denied coverage. So I had to sue along with the engineering firm, the insurance company, to get them to pay the other $800,000. That cost $100,000 in legal fees, $50,000 from me and $50,000 from them. Ultimately, the insurance company stepped to the plate. It was a lousy carrier. And it was like, the premium was $215,000 and that was cheap, this firm. It was crazy. Anyway,
Why was the engineering firm liable there?
because they didn't do anything. There was someone in the trench and they said, you have to shore it. And the foreman convinced the engineer that they're almost done. And so he didn't say, no, get out of the trench. So ultimately they were held partially responsible for that.
But not a contractor? The contractor?
The contract, the employee, hold on. The contractor's not responsible because those people would receive workman's compensation. So therefore the contractor is immune from lawsuits.
And-
Yeah, I know.
Clarify something. So like in
Yes.
that situation, this is a public job,
I'll get right there. That's a
public job.
public job.
So what about OSHA requirements? There's a very strict OSHA requirements, I'm sure.
Okay, yeah, so OSHA requirements, let me say this, I'm not an OSHA guy, I don't know much about it, but this is my understanding. Contractors have a responsibility to build according to the OSHA regulations. If they don't, they get fined, they can lose their license and all that kind of stuff. That's the only thing I know, but in terms of the guy that died with the other paraplegic, my client was responsible for $400,000. It was a city of New York site. So the city was responsible. And then ultimately my client had to pay their piece, the $800,000.
You're saying it's separate. The OSHA may have gone over to the contract.
Completely separate. Yeah, and I was involved because that's not my guy. Okay, so anyway, so here's the issue, here's the point that I'm trying to make, and I apologize, I know I'm belaboring it. The point is this imminent danger. If you see imminent danger, someone who's going to walk through a hole, who's in a trench that's lower than 3 feet, and it's not sure, or whatever it might be, it's important, imminent danger, you say, whoever the person is in the trench, get out of the trench, and then go to the person charged with responsibility at the site, the foreman, whatever it might be, and say, I saw an unsafe site. You need to do something about it. It's your responsibility. And then you're going to write a letter to your client, owner, presumably saying, I saw an unsafe site. I saw an unsafe site, told the contractor about it. It's their responsibility. Okay? But beyond imminent danger, don't worry about site safety. Don't walk around with a badge. If people aren't wearing their helmets, right? Not your problem. As long as you are following the appropriate protocol. So when you go on site, you're wearing boots, you're wearing jeans, you wear a hard hat, you're a guest of the contractor. That's all you need to be concerned about. But the only threshold is imminent danger.
I have
Any-
a question.
Yes, please.
Is that a situation where you should stop work?
Oh, excellent question. Okay. Never stop work, ever. Okay. And I'll there are a couple of reasons beyond that, but here's the thing. Okay. As long as you're just addressing the person that's in danger, you are not stopping work. Okay. The only one that can stop work is the contractor or the owner. That's it. We no longer, since like 1963, 1964, we no longer have control over the site. It's specifically the contractor, okay? Because what happens is if you stop work, okay, and by the way, that's never happened in my career when one of our clients stopped work. It can happen, it could happen, never happened, has not happened as of yet. But if you stop work, number one, you're taking on responsibility for the site safety. Number two, potentially there could be delay claims. You're stopping work, but you're delaying the progress of whatever, right? So you're taking on responsibility way beyond where you would want to be. Okay. But that's a very good question, like I asked. But just imminent danger, the person in the trench, the person that's, going to fall through the hole, whatever it might be. Okay. Any other questions? All right.
Just a reminder, when you go to a site, always coordinate the visit, make sure people are expecting you, they know you're gonna be there and that you're with a contractor and you're not just wandering around the site by yourself or with your coworker. Just always go with a contractor.
That's a good point. Good thought of that. Okay, so listen, if anyone has any questions at any point in time, something doesn't look right, feel right, whatever, let us know. Please call us, okay? That's what we're doing. Okay? Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Yeah, have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. And for the office, this is just the beginning of a series of lunch and learns for the CA kind of experience. So we will keep in touch and let you know what else is coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, very welcome.
Thank you.
Ready?
Thank you.